Vernon Adams Jr. was pulled early in the second quarter this past week after generating just 2 first downs on Montreal's first 4 possessions against Toronto. Trevor Harris came on and threw 270 yards and an interception and had the Owls in position to win that game late had David Cote not missed a 21-yard field goal wide left. Adams won't play this week after contracting COVID-19, but who do you believe should be viewed as the Montreal's long-term starter?
Now, I thought Vernon Adams Jr. being pulled was a little bit early. He did not have a good start to that game, but he only threw 4 passes before he was pulled by head coach Khari Jones. To me, that was an early decision. If you want to look at the game we just talked about, Bo Levi Mitchell, by that extent, should have been pulled, and he wouldn't have had that huge comeback in the second half. Vernon Adams Jr. has shown us in the past he can be a player that is capable of those types of miraculous turnarounds in game. But right now for the Alouettes, you have to make a decision because 2 quarterbacks is way worse than none. You need to pick one of these guys. And it seems clear that Trevor Harris has to be the guy going forward. If you do not trust Vernon Adams Jr. to work himself out of a rut this early in the season, that early in a game, there's not enough trust there to be able to ride with him throughout the entire 18-game CFL season. Trevor Harris is viewed as the steadier hand. Perhaps that's what this organization needs right now. And I think even if VA hadn't contracted COVID this week, and we wish him a full recovery, even if he was fully healthy, I think Trevor Harris would have got this start.
It seemed like that's the way it was going to go, especially after the way the Argos situation went in terms of Adams Jr. being pulled. And I don't necessarily think it was entirely Khari Jones' decision because Danny Machocha, the general manager, was down there on the sideline. And we know Machocha likes a quarterback more closely to the style of Ricky Ray, who he won a Grey Cup with way back in Edmonton. I'm not saying Harris is Ricky Ray, but the styles are similar. High completion rate, guys that win from the pocket and that are less erratic than Adams Jr. I think Jones probably trusts Vernon Adams Jr. to work through some issues because that's what he did in 2019 to get the Alouettes in the playoffs. And even though he was hurt last year, you could see times where when he gets hot, he's really good and he might be as good as anybody in the league. But the issue is he's not consistent. And when he's not hot, he's really ice cold. And I'm with you there, JC. I think the decision, regardless of what happened at the end of that Toronto game, would have been to go with Harris again because he finished it out. He studies the offense, and mentally and in terms of body language, he's not as up and down as Vernon Adams Jr. is. Credit to him. He wears his heart on his sleeve. We love those type of athletes. But Harris, you could look at, you don't know if he's thrown a touchdown, an interception, or taken a massive shot in the pocket. He just gets up and goes about his business. So I think that's what Machocha likes. And make no mistake, he is the one in Montreal pulling the strings.
Yeah, to me, and by the way, I will point out, before the season started, we talked a lot about VA and Trevor Harris in Montreal, and a lot of people accused us of making mountains out of molehills. Like, no, this is VA's job. Well, he had it for 5 quarters. Like, let's get that right. This was always a move that could have been made if Vernon Adams Jr. did not come out of the gate hot this season, and lo and behold, the change was made. Another quote I thought was telling. Trevor Harris was on the All Ball podcast this week, hosted by our good friend Natea J. He said, quote, "There might be a time where we go back to VA." And I told him he's just got to be ready for that, close quote. To me, that wording, "there might be a time where we go back to VA," says everything you need to know about who is going to start this week, regardless of Vernon Adams contracting COVID, because this quote was said on a Sunday. Vernon Adams Jr. did not miss practice due to illness until Mondays. In fact, Sunday morning, Harris and Adams were in the facility together working out and watching film. So to me, Harris was always going to be the starter in week 3, and it appears as though he's going to be the starter for weeks to come in La Belle Provence.
One element of this we haven't talked about, I think we do need to touch on, is the fact that the injury to William Stanback also changes what this team has to do offensively. And I think VA benefits from having that pounding running back that you do have to account for. So all those RPOs, all those play actions, all of those things that get him out to the edge and rolling out outside the pocket work effectively and he can work his magic. Trevor Harris doesn't need that as much as a pocket passer. You can make it a more high efficiency offense with him at the helm, and without William Stanback, with all due respect to Jesperong Antry and Walter Fletcher, I think you need that.
Can we just, for 1 second, alert freezing cold takes here? Because Vernon Adams Jr. was hot and bothered all off season and directed a lot of that animosity towards me. And usually I don't like talking about this stuff and I ignored it, but we were coming from a place of knowledge, knowing that Harris chose to go back to Montreal, believing it was his best chance to get back into a number one role. That's already what's happened, as Hodge pointed out, 5 quarters into the season, and Vernon Adams Jr. was lighting me up on Twitter, which is fine. I can take it. I'm a big boy. But we were essentially warning Vernon Adams Jr. that he needed to be on his game to start the season, or this is what was going to happen. So let's just leave it there, Mr. Adams Jr., because you had fair warning that this was a possibility, and it's gone the way that we thought at least was possible.